Hi, thank you for getting as far as number 6 in our Making Sense of Poetry videos on the topics of unseen poems. This time we're going to go through 2 or 3 different topics. First of all, we shall be challenging personalities in the poem, and then secondly we shall be looking at actions and senses. More of those later on. First, let's go back to our Dead Sea Scrolls, and here come the 12 commandments that we've looked at so far: physical appearance, vocabulary, imagery, point of view, personalities and personification, actions and senses are next in line. There we go. Arrowheads all over the place. Now let me begin with a plug for a book, not one of mine. It's by the well-known author E.M. Forster, who wrote Howard's End and A Passage to India, amongst other novels. And the cover you see there is of the ebook version, available on Amazon for a giveaway price, of his analysis of the novel, which is called Aspects of the Novel. It's an account of narrative fiction which is crammed with good common sense, beautifully written, and endures to this day. It was first printed in the 1920s, and the ebook is available on Amazon for a giveaway price. Why do I mention that? Because we're about to deal with one of the important aspects of the novel which he considers. That is the nature of character. He says that there are 2 kinds of character. First of all, flat characters. Now, this does not mean that they have been put on the ironing board and all the lumpy bits have been removed out of them. It refers to characters who are there for one particular reason, and that reason only, serving a function. The butler comes to the door and says, "Good afternoon, sir." The girl in the shop says, "Hello, what can I give you?" The doctor says, "Oh, you're not looking very well," and so on and so forth. A whole raft of characters appear in books, walk-on parts, if you like. And here is a typical walk-on part. Here is Bob the Builder, who stands there with his spanner, which rather looks like a dead fish from here, a spanner ready to do battle on your behalf. He's a flat character. He does not develop in the course of the action. He is a walk-on part. Now here is my imitation of Star Wars. Instead of beam me up, Scotty, we turn it round and round, flat out, and it goes to beam me sideways, Scotty. And if you look at a flat character and turn him sideways, we just have to get rid of that one. And there he is, flat as a pancake. No development, no change. End of story. Now then, the other kind of character is a rounded character, one that changes and develops over the course of the action. So here comes the caption: 2 kinds of character, and this is the second kind, the rounded character. And lo and behold, here we have Bob the Builder again, but this time he's not a walk-on part. He's the chief character in this imaginary fictional work, who struggles to get to the top of his profession, and the arrow tells us, when you spin him round with my Star Trek device which transports him, or a copy of him, to where he was at the beginning, from where he was at the beginning to the end. Knock those out of the way, and here it comes. That's the final character sideways on, and you can see he's far from being flat. In fact, he's become one of the boss's men with the hat on. So, before we go any further though, I can hear you crying, but hang on, a lyric poem is not as long as a novel, and not of that kind of complexity, and it's not what lyric poems are about. I know, but this is introduced just so that you have the notion of flat and rounded characters, and you can refer to the characters in your poetry as flat, probably for the most part. But it is important that you recognize them and are aware of them. So let's go to the magic list again, and we've whacked our way through physical appearance and vocabulary imagery point of view, and we are now going to deal with the actions and senses of the poem after we have dealt with this little item, personification, which is extremely important in lyric poetry. Personification means taking something which isn't human and endowing it with human qualities. For example, the sun, that famous poem by John Donne of the two lovers in bed. He looks up through the window of the curtains and says, "Busy old fool, unruly sun, why have you come to bother us lovers?" He is creating a personality out of the sun. Now for a couple more examples of personification. We deal now with autumn as the main protagonist, and with it the sun, both of them personified in Keats' famous Ode to Autumn. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the mossed cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core. Here autumn is the season of mists, and is turned into a friend, a close bosom friend, and the sun is described as maturing, and the two conspire together to bring about the miracle of autumn. Personification of autumn and the sun. One more, far less cheerful, this one. A wintry scene, a wintry road, and personification appears again, but this time we're dealing with death and immortality. This is Emily Dickinson, who has this ability to use the simplest of phrases, the least complicated structures, and so forth, to create an extraordinarily powerful effect, and not a particularly pleasant one in this case. Here we go. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. I find that nicely ambiguous, that immortality is a passenger in the carriage, that is one of the things that goes along with death. There's almost a but in the background, but does it apply to me? So, personification. Now a fairly brief look at characters and actions in the poem, with an emphasis on the action. One of my famous charts is on the top of the screen. The blue line is the passage of the character through all kinds of trials and tribulations until he comes to the culminating point in the novel where all problems are resolved, the good are rewarded, the punishment is meted out to the bad, and they all live happily ever after, or not. Near the top of that graph, as you can see, the character has that real struggle, because the nearer towards his goal he gets, the more difficult it is made for him. And in popular fiction, that means that the more action is directed against him, the more he's bound hand and foot and thrown into a dungeon and has to leap out with one bound, as it were. And once he's got there, he's delighted, of course, and skateboards off to a happy ending. That there's a rounded character who will go through all that routine. Now, of course, narrative fiction is a quite different animal from poetry, and you can see a much smaller graph beginning at the bottom of the screen, indicating the passage of a poem. Such action as there is in a short poem is usually very brief, and it is also the case that much of it is concerned with inaction, as you can see from the idle character in the hammock, and that the action doesn't actually go anywhere, it just stays in one place. So a typical poem is not too concerned with action, but if there are actions in the poem, keep your eyes open for them. Now, I'm so fond of this chart, I'll inflict it on you just once more time. We've got to everything now, down the list, one after the other. I won't bore you by repeating them, but we're about to come across very interesting, the senses. Pause for a moment and think how many senses you have and what they are. Okay, I'm sure that you have worked that out. So here's a little character who is like the three monkeys. He has no eyes, no ears, no mouth, see no evil, hear no evil, and so forth. But these are the senses. First of all, the eyes. Sight is keenly important in poetry. Second, hearing, which we will look at again in a few moments. Thirdly, touch. Fourthly, smell. And finally, taste. And if you observe the bottom of the screen on the left-hand side, you'll see that they all duly pop up. Sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste. You might also have noticed that they're probably in order of significance in poetry as it happens. That sight is most important and hearing just about, and the other three, although they are important when they occur, appear less frequently. However, I have cobbled together a selection of poems which in turn concentrate on each of these items. So press the button, and now we go to a famous poem by Wordsworth, praising the site of a famous city. Any ideas what it might be? It's London. Well, it may have been beautiful in its day. Let's see what he has to say. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. The city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning. But in my sour opinion, that view was ruined by the Millennium Wheel and the cucumber or aubergine or whatever it's called, which could all be mercifully cut down by the shard. Anyway, next, hearing. Thomas Hardy, as you will probably know, is a famous novelist of the 19th century. Under the Greenwood Tree, Jude Obscure, The Mayor of Casterbridge. The number of novels seems almost relentless, and he has tartly been observed as the village atheist laughing at the village idiot, but that's a rather unkind name. He's also a pretty substantial poet, and here, very sadly, he's talking about his wife who has died. Woman, much missed, how you call to me, saying that now you are not as you were when you changed from the one who was all to me. But at first, when our day was fair, she changed a lot over the years, not for the better. And the fact she's calling to him now implies she's calling as once he knew her many years ago. Emily Dickinson, again, remember that name, the American poetess. She is also known for plain talking, as I told you about death, immortality, and the carriage. And these lines invoke a happy relationship, like the sea putting minor streams to rest. It's a really odd image, but you have to think about it before it begins to make sense of a sort. By the way, awful here is used in the archaic sense of awe-inspiring. He touched me, so I lived to know that such a day permitted, so I groped upon his breast. It was a boundless place to me, and silenced as the awful sea puts minor streams to rest. Next up, smell, another unrepresented sense in poetry, and this is the poet Edward Thomas, who evokes the tart odour of a bonfire. This talks of memories of togetherness and things past, and the destructive force of fire, and the fact that it all turns to ashes in the end. And this is just 4 lines from this poem. The smokes smell too, flowing from where a bonfire burns the dead, the waste, the dangerous, and all to sweetness turns. And finally, last one up here, Alexander Pope, whom you may know from the 18th century, a well-known poet whose quotes most people have come across. A little learning is a dangerous thing, dig deep. And here he is talking about something a little bit less philosophical. A side of mutton, or a leg of mutton, I believe it is, that he has cooked to perfection. And he is slavering at the thought of eating this served with accompaniments solid and liquid. Taste. On the table, spread the cloth. Let the knives be sharp and clean. Pickles get, and salad both. Let them each be fresh and green. With small beer, good ale, and wine, oh, ye gods, how I shall dine. Five senses. but also a sixth sense. I notice that the literary critics, some of them have created any number of senses, but let's be sensible about this and say there are 5 senses that we generally know about. And here is a sixth sense, which has got nothing to do with the clever film of the same name. What I mean by the sixth sense is looking internally into inner thoughts and contemplation, not externally into the world of sight, hearing, taste, touch, and so forth. William Butler Yeats. About the moon. He's contemplating the moon. And he says, from the first crescent to the half, the dream but summons to adventure, and the man is always happy like a bird or beast. But while the moon is rounding towards the full, he follows whatever whims most difficult among whims not impossible, and though scarred. That's a bit of a meaty feast of poetry, but that's the kind of internal contemplation that we've come across time and again in lyric poetry. And that is that for this episode. I hope you've understood some of what I've been talking about, and look forward to the remaining episodes of Making Sense of Unseen Poems. Thank you for watching and listening if you have been.